my name is Olivia Olson.
And I'm Ben Pluska. Today we will be discussing the effects of imperialism on Latin America.
We will be speaking about the social, political, cultural, and economic effects in today's 20-minute special.
Let's move to our first topic. The conflict between Benito Juarez and Maximilian Robespierre is turning into a great clash.
Our crew has more on the scene.
A land of immense natural resources, it was inevitable that European rulers used both diplomacy and domination strategies to annex the region into their ever-increasing treasury of land and wealth. The fundamental conflict between Europeans and South Americans is obvious in this never-before-seen negotiation between Benito Juarez, the first president of independent Mexico, and Maximilian I, the final monarch of Mexico.
Tens of thousands of Mexicans have died fighting the European forces for their independence.
I fight for Mexico. My allegiance lies with the people of this country, not with the Europeans overseas.
I do not doubt that you think you are doing the correct thing for the people of Mexico, but the time for European imperialism is over.
What you do not understand is that you are already reliant on the connections you have with the European economy. When you sever these ties, you will fall into an even deeper depression than you are in right now.
We can provide for ourselves economically. We're one of the most gifted lands in the entire world regarding natural resources.
It is not as cheap as you might believe to build mines and factories. You will rely heavily on European investments, which will cause you to be more dependent on Europe than ever before.
The revolution is inevitable. My people and I will deal with the problems as they come. For now, we must take our first step. We will never be free from European control unless we become an independent nation. It is about time we removed ourselves from European elitism that plagues our land.
The people of Mexico cannot control themselves. Without the power of an established European influence, who will determine who owns the silver mines or plantations?
This is exactly my point. Even in the face of defeat, the cowardly Europeans try to fool a native into petty politics. It is not time to determine which European makes money off of our hard labor. It is time for the natives of Mexico to take matters into their own hands and profit from our own labor for once. I have heard tales as a child of a time when my family was respected among natives. Europeans stole this from me, and I will ensure that no European ever manipulates and abuses the people of Mexico again.
Ironically, Maximilian truly did care about the people of Mexico. He was correct about the economic struggles that South America would endure for decades to come.
Today is June 7th, and stock market prices are making a turnaround as the European scare fades into the past.
What was once a promising new marketplace for industrializing European nations, South America became wary of foreign white oppressors. As revolutions spread throughout many tropical dependencies in South America, independent and sovereign states were formed.
Little did these revolutionaries know, this would cause an economic downfall throughout South America. Ironically, many of the revolutionaries fought off oppression for an increased quality of life and standard of living. Sadly, these requests were not met as poverty befell the continent.
This poverty stemmed from two key factors, both major oversights during a revolution. The first was a loss of marketplace for produced goods. The major economic exports of South America all ended up in the European nations they existed under. After separating from Europe, South America had no major marketplace to sell goods.
Secondly, without major nations who had already the economic influence to power a booming economy, there was no major funding to allow for continued production of factories and mines throughout Latin America. After becoming independent states, many South American nations searched far and wide for investments from European merchants. These investments often backfired, causing more economic reliance and debt to European nations than South America had experienced before the revolution.
Thankfully, it appears that the economic slump has reached its pinnacle.
That's right, this turnaround couldn't have come at a better time. Improving relationships with Europe has allowed for much of South America's export industry to have found a better marketplace.
Fundamental philosophical ideas surrounding the era have even changed in response to this economic resurgence. An originally French philosophy of positivism has been accepted by many Latin American officials and politicians.
In addition to the growth of consumer needs in Europe, scientific achievements are allowing for unparalleled production and transportation of goods.
A massive increase in demand for copper and rubber accompanies the scientific development that has caused these raw materials to be so diverse and multi-purposed in today's world.
Advantages such as refrigerated shipping allows for transportation of goods to Europe, which never would have made the journey in the past.
Finally, an increase in population and consumer markets in both the United States and Europe has caused an increase in demands for goods such as coffee, wheat, and sugar.
An increasingly liberal government can be attributed to the widespread prosperity. This is because more and more entrepreneurs and bankers from foreign lands are cooperating with Latin American landowners and merchants to fund liberal public work programs.
Thanks for signing on, and we'll see you again next time.
Danny and Moloch. As both of them implied, the liberal government helped increase prosperity within the Latin American states, but liberal governments also helped increase the spread of arts and culture. Pablo Neruda is a Chilean poet, but he was also a politician and diplomat. Because of Neruda being active in politics, his poems convey his thought on the government. Neruda had many famous poems, including United Fruit Company and Standard Oil Company. Both of these works depict the topic of American imperialism in Latin America. He was a true freedom fighter who was fighting to get away from the oppression of the corrupt dictators. In our interview, he will be discussing the cultural effect of imperialism in Latin America.
Hello, I am here with Pablo Neruda. How are you, Mr. Neruda?
I'm great, thank you.
So, Mr. Neruda, we're here today to discuss your work with anti-imperialism. Many of your poems convey anger towards anti-imperialism. Would you care to explain where these motives came from?
My motives come from seeing the suffering of my people because of Americans. These people influence our weak leaders to become followers of the Americans. The leaders in our country become weak and end up wanting to do things the American way and not caring about their country or their people.
How is imperialism affecting people's lives in Latin America?
In my poem, United Fruit Company, I refer to the United States to be a giant running all of our banana plantations. Banana are our main crop in Central America, and many of the locals turn to farming as their main source of income. Because this fruit company is solely made to try and control the trading of bananas in Central America, it causes them to also in turn control our economy. I depict these farmers as restless heroes and sleeping dead, because year after year, these people work hard to make a living cultivating these crops, but are deprived from cultivating their greatness because this larger force is holding them back. People are deprived because of this American influence every day.
What about your leaders? Why are they so weak?
Our leaders are all corrupted. I call them flies in my poem, United Fruit Company. Like our leaders, flies show up wherever food is. They are hungry for power and oppress our country due to their strong ties to the Americans.
I see, that is definitely an interesting way to think about it. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Neruda.
No, thank you.
Pablo Neruda was a great poet. Now let's look into another artist who has a different point of view on imperialism. Francisco de Goya was an impressionist painter in Spain born in Fuentedoros in 1746. He painted for the royal court and was a modernist, a person who has more liberal views compared to the classical European way. He was exiled to Bordeaux, France, due to the revolutions in Spain. Today we will be interviewing Francisco de Goya, and we will learn about the revolutionary artist's deeper meaning in his works. Thank you for taking your time to talk today, Señor de Goya.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, what is the motivation behind your art?
Well, aside from painting for the royal court, I like to create what I witness in my own life. There's the brash ladies of the courtyard, and there's the horrors of war. I see things as they occur in front of my own eyes. I want to remember these moments, so I believe it's my duty to chronicle them with my hands.
Well, that is certainly a beautiful way to express that. And I also noticed you have impeccable detail in your art. Can you elaborate on that?
It does take a lot of time.
A lot of time indeed. Now, let's move on to politics. What are your theories on imperialism in Europe?
Well, I'm not one for imperialism, obviously. I believe men should be free to live in their homelands instead of being controlled by an outside force. This reminds me of what's going on right now in France, actually. But I would love Spain to show the same enthusiasm about independence, but France just won't take our grounds. It seems as if imperialism requires violence and brutal war to succeed. This actually reminds me of the 2nd and 3rd of May about 6 years ago now. My painting I'm working on now, it shows what the French did to us while we were fighting in defense just the day before. Let me ask you this. How can a man be free if he's constantly tied to another nation? The answer is, he cannot.
Ah yes, the 3rd of May, 1808. I really enjoyed your usage of depth and contrast to show the difference between light and dark and how you felt about that time.
Why, thank you. I'm glad someone from your generation notices that too.
With that said, how do you feel about the colonies in America?
Well, when it comes to the New World, I see more of an economic benefit for Spain. I believe that it's a good thing that we're teaching the natives there our values.
Okay. I see. Yes, a very logical point of view indeed. Well, it seems like we're running out of time, so thank you, Senor de Goya.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much.
The Latin American Wars of Independence were the revolutions that took place in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It began when Napoleon Bonaparte dethroned Ferdinand and replaced him with his brother. This led to a weakening of Spanish power in Latin America and a surge of support for independent republics. And so now we'll begin by asking the question that others are dying to hear. Why rebel? No, really, people are actually dying out there.
We are here today with Porfirio Diaz, the infamous elected dictator of Mexico who played a key role in the imperialization of Mexico in Latin America. Hello, Senor Diaz. Could you please introduce yourself, sir?
My name is Porfirio Diaz. I was the president of Mexico during 1876 to 1911. Although I put people into slavery after I became dictator, I made the economy of Mexico much better, and I made Mexico catch up to the rest of the world in terms of technology. I was able to do this by extending the trade through means of modern westernization. If Mexico didn't have me, Mexico would still be one of the most backward countries in the world. But the stuff I mentioned before doesn't matter that much. The fact I want everyone to remember about me is that I'm a good soldier and that Cinco de Mayo was made after my victorious battle. I tried to set people free and tried my best to get one of the Mexican people out of the hands of France, and I succeeded in the Battle of Puebla.
How come people revolted against you at the end of your reign?
I was a leader for far too long, and I didn't want anyone else to be leader. It wasn't that I was a bad leader. I did a lot of good, but I didn't care much for the poor people.
Ironically, you were the one fighting to set the Mexican people free from France, but at the end, the Mexican people were fighting to save themselves from you.
Don't take it that way. I may have seemed corrupt to many people, but I was merely helping Mexico. I knew Francisco Madero wasn't going to be a better leader than I was, so I cheated the system to make sure that I won. Remember, I single-handedly brought up Mexico's economy.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Gracias.
Lucas Chen from North Carolina, now back to the desk.
Now we move on to talk to one of the most important leaders of the Mexican Revolution, Emiliano Zapata, who opposed the General Porfirio.
Gracias. Ahora estoy aquí con Emiliano. ¿Cómo está, señor?
Hola, señor. Estoy bien y vamos a la entrevista.
Sí, ¿qué es tu opinión sobre Porfirio Diaz, señor?
Porfirio pudo sido un gran hombre con grandes intenciones, pero los métodos que se implementó fueron terribles, aunque el intento que nos libró de la prisión que Francia había sitiado sobre nosotros nos puso en su propio. Oprimió la clase baja peor que la gente se podría manejar. Poco a poco, la clase baja se dio cuenta de no podría aguantar más. También vi la injusticia entre ellos y tomé acción.
Sí, pero ¿qué piensas sobre la revolución? ¿Estuve la mejor opción o una opción más pacífico hubiera sido mejor?
Esta es una buena pregunta. Al principio, pensé en la elección que hice de rebelión hacia el gobierno. Es contra la ley para cometer tales atrocidades, pero después creo que hice la elección correcta. ¿Qué más merece el gobierno después de todo que han hecho a sus ciudadanos?
Sí, gracias, señor Zapata.
Gracias por tu tiempo.
Sí, y también. That, folks, was the key Mexican Revolution character who opted for sweeping reforms, and now we are on to a small clip of an uprising.
Libertad! 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 Libertad!
As you can tell, this segment really sheds some light on the two sides of most governments during this time period, but then again, it's all about perspective.
And going off of perspective, here the United States really disapproves of European colonization, whereas Europe, not so much.
at the proposal of the Russian imperial government made through the minister of the emperor residing there. A full power and instructions have been transmitted to the minister of the United States at St. Petersburg to arrange by amicable negotiation the respective rights and interests of the two nations on the northwest coast of this continent. A similar proposal has been made by His Imperial Majesty to the government of Great Britain, which has likewise been acceded to. The government of the United States has been desirous by this friendly proceeding of manifesting the great value which they have invariably attached to the friendship of the Emperor and their solicitude to cultivate the best understanding with his government. In the discussions to which this interest has given rise, and in the arrangements by which they terminate the occasion, has been judged proper for asserting, as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents, by the free and independent condition by which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. Hello, sir.
I'd like to begin our meeting today by talking about the so-called haciendas that you and your associates have established everywhere. These prison camps, essentially, are an infringement of our rights and an affront to our nation's sovereignty. What do you have to say to that effect?
Well, these humane estates that you refer to are simply plantations. I've heard no accounts of cruelty coming from any of these places.
Please, sir, try to be reasonable. You make enough already from our workers and from your other colonies. I only ask that you reduce the number of haciendas, or at least try to work our servants less.
I think you're asking for too much. Most of these goods coming from the haciendas are going back to the people that make them. So these workers are only helping themselves, and they're running an economic and humane style. And I think you're forgetting your place, sir. Both the ultimate power comes from the king, and through proxy, me and my associates. I say that this meeting is over.
As you may have seen, most meetings between local leaders and members of the Spanish Empire have been rather one-sided. Most of the politics of the day are dominated by Europeans. But that may not be the case for much longer. Ever since the death of Charles II in 1701, local leaders have begun gaining more and more power. And we have footage here of a local rally, but for safety reasons, we won't be able to disclose any name or location for this rally.
Brothers, sisters, fellow countrymen, let us regain control over our lives and our nation. For centuries, the Europeans have maintained strict control over our country. But now we have an opportunity to change the power dynamics. After so much strife in Spain with all their wars, we now have a chance. Look to the north. Our allies in North America, they have regained their land from the Europeans. There has been talk about a law to introduce South American sovereignty. The time to act is nigh. We must act now. Will you join the cause to restore our former glory and to restore our nation's traditions? Most importantly, will you join the fight to make South America great again?
As you can see, revolutionary sentiments have been brewing amongst all groups throughout Latin America, except for the Criollas, who have been notably opposed to any revolutionary movements.
Politics was among the most important parts of this revolution. While it may seem like a good thing to have an established government during this time period, the Latin Americans did not have a government to brag about. The government was full of corruption, and it chased after power. Luckily, though, the political issues began to clear up.
We hope that today's special has shown you the drastic effects of imperialism in Latin America.
And with that, we wish our viewers at home a good night and farewell.